Hello everyone, this is your friend and I am back with a new fanfic part 2. The fanfic title is What If Hinata Was the Only One Who Could Save Naruto Part 2. I hope you enjoy this fanfic, and if you enjoy this, so don't forget to subscribe my channel. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto fought the urge to yawn as he slowly wrapped the gauze around his hands. The previous night had been anything but fun, but he had escaped with nothing more than minor lacerations on his hands. He had even managed to get an hour or two of sleep near the end. Not a perfect night by any means, but less violent than it could have been. It was the crack of dawn, and while he was still tired, Naruto knew that Hinata was due to arrive within the next 45 minutes. Above all else, he did not want her to see the injury. It's not all that bad, and it'll heal within a week, but she got really shaken up the last time she saw the cuts. She's got better things to do than fawn over me. The blonde thought to himself as he pulled the wrapping tightly with his teeth. The girl was clearly fragile despite her strong words and unwavering conviction to help him, and the blonde intended to defend her innocence from the worst of his problems. She doesn't need to know. She doesn't deserve that kind of stress, he thought firmly. He was still largely unsure of what he thought of Hinata Hyuga as a whole, but he held no ill will toward her in any way. She was genuinely, legitimately kind. That much was clear to him now. What concerned him was how committed she seemed to be to the notion of uncovering the deeper roots of his struggles. The heiress' shy demeanor hid an intensity that only ever seemed to show itself when she was greatly concerned for the well-being of the blonde, and she tended to be stubborn in those moments. More stubborn than Naruto had the energy to resist in most cases of late. It was a predicament he had no solution for, and the circumstances themselves were paradoxical. She cared too much rather than not enough. It was a puzzling reality to grapple with given how little he felt like he knew about her. She's next in line to lead her clan, she can cook, she's pretty cute, and that's about all I know. I mean, I don't dislike any of that, but the way she acts is so weird. It makes no sense. Naruto pondered silently as he laid down on the couch upon completing his bandages. From there, he simply allowed his mind to drift aimlessly as he stared up at the ceiling. For the next half an hour, he lay inert without moving a muscle. He was shaken from this trance by the predictable sound of his door unlocking. As expected, Hinata quickly slipped in his door and quietly shut the door behind her. Humorously, it took her a moment to notice that he was already out of his room and on the couch. When she caught sight of him, she squeaked in surprise and quickly straightened her posture. "Oh, you're up early, Naruto-kun." She greeted him with a hasty, awkward smile. The blonde rubbed his eyes and stretched to relieve some of the stiffness in his joints. "I had something to take care of. I might go back to bed in a few minutes," he replied. The heiress responded by immediately reaching into her bag and producing a bento. At the sight of it, Naruto's left eye twitched. It seemed they were about to play the same game they had the morning prior. He had no desire to eat. It had truthfully been more than a week since he had eaten more than one meal in a day, but it mattered little. Food held little appeal. "Can we not do this right now?" he grumbled. Hinata shook her head and walked up to the couch. She then sat down next to him and set the bento on his lap. "There are chopsticks inside. Now please eat. You can go back to bed when you're done eating," she said. Her tone made it perfectly clear in the gentlest way that it was not up for debate. She sounded like an ever so slightly incensed mother. Naruto reluctantly opened the package and took out the chopsticks. It was rice with small bits of vegetable and chicken spaced throughout. "Staring at it won't put it in your stomach, Naruto-kun." Hinata pressed as he stubbornly refused to begin eating. The blonde responded by simply poking at it with the chopsticks. At this, the heiress sighed and took the bento back from him. Thinking he had won, Naruto relaxed and began to think about other things. These thoughts were sorely interrupted by the feeling of a piece of chicken being lightly pressed on the side of his lips. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked awkwardly as Hinata poked at his mouth with the food-carrying chopsticks. The girl's face was slightly red, but her expression was just as bored and unwavering as it had been before. "If you won't do it, then I'll feed you. You aren't getting out of eating, like I told you yesterday. Now open up," she said bluntly. Naruto immediately reddened to match her. For a few moments, They simply sat in uncomfortable silence. Eventually, Naruto conceded and bit the chicken off the chopsticks. The heiress, lips tugged into a satisfied smile that she tried and failed to suppress. See, that wasn't so bad. Now, do we need to keep on doing it this way, or are you going to act your age and eat it by yourself? She asked. The blonde grumbled something to himself and took the bento and chopsticks. Hinata almost looked disappointed as he began to eat the rice meal. Once he was finished, he set the bento aside and glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. You got a real kick out of that, didn't you? He said. Hinata gave him a light smile and shrugged her shoulders. It was quite endearing, I must say. But I'm glad I don't have to baby you through your meals. She said jovially. She was clearly quite pleased with herself. Naruto leaned back on the couch and drummed his fingers on his own thigh. Don't you have homework to do or something? He asked. The Hyuga girl shook her head and remained in her seat only a few feet from him. I worked ahead last night. I got the next 3 days worth done. In other words, I'm able to enjoy myself here far more, she explained. Naruto chuckled and gestured widely to the room around them. I'm kind of boring. Even more than I normally am. You're probably gonna be bored to tears inside of an hour or two, he said. Hinata's response came back at him with near automatic speed. Being here with you is all I need. You did complain that you don't know me very well the other day, so consider this your chance to change that, she shot back. Though he was briefly taken aback by her directness, Naruto opted to make the most of his situation. Fine, fine. So, what are your hobbies? He asked as an opener. Hinata folded her hands in her lap and settled into her spot. Well, I enjoy cooking quite a bit. My mother taught me everything I know about it. I also like to press flowers sometimes. Gardens in general, really. I love plant life, she said with an easy look of contentment on her face. Even in his current state, Naruto couldn't help but smile just a tad. You're girly as hell, he commented jokingly. Hinata's cheeks gained color. She then gave him a shy look. Is that good or bad? She asked. Naruto found that he had not fully planned for what he would say to such a question. As such, he simply scratched the back of his head and spit out the first thing that came to mind. Well, yeah, I think so. I like girls, he said awkwardly. It was Hinata's turn to laugh, and she did in the form of a reserved giggle. I'm glad that I'm to your liking, she teased him. The response seemed to surprise them both, because neither of them could hide their emberment as they sat in socially inept silence. Yeah, I think. Uruka chose the right person, Naruto said quietly. Hinata's eyes widened slightly. She then smiled inwardly and fiddled with her jacket sleeves. You've talked more this morning than you have in all the time I've been checking on you. I'd like to think that means I'm doing my job, she said softly. A half beat later, she continued. Not that I consider this a HLE or a task. It makes me happy to see you being more yourself, she added quickly. The blonde turned his head to study her. She looked genuinely content. You're so much less stuttery than you were. You could hardly talk like a week ago, he said. The heiress met his gaze slowly. I still stutter sometimes, but I know that I need to be strong for you. You aren't okay. I know you aren't feeling well, even right now. If I'm going to support you and give you a shoulder to lean on, I can't be tripping over myself. She explained. Naruto felt a spark of warmth ignite in him deep down. It quickly died, but he held fast to the brief flare and shelved the feeling. You really shouldn't get your hopes up, Hinata. There's more to this than you can solve, he said carefully. The heiress leaned forward a bit and tilted her head to one side. Why don't you tell me about it then? If I know, then maybe I can adjust and help, she suggested. Naruto firmly shook his head and lowered his eyes to the ground. I don't like being hated, Saul Page, he muttered. He had fully expected to be reprimanded for his words, but instead, Hinata diverted his expectations and stood to her feet. There's a place I'd like to show you. Come and walk with me, Naruto-kun, she said. Finding that he had no opposition to the idea, Naruto suppressed a yawn and rose to meet her. Where to? He asked as they exited the apartment. The Hyuga girl shook her head and fell into step with him on his left side. I'll explain when we arrive. Hinata gave her fellow clan members a challenging look as she led Naruto through the front lot of the Hyuga estate. They all looked more than a bit puzzled by her having brought the village pariah into their home, and while their reactions made a bit of sense on some level, they were still uncalled for by Hinata's estimation. Once they had taken the silent hint and returned to their business, the heiress picked up her pace and gestured to Naruto to keep up. "Can I ask where we're going yet?" he said quizzically. He looked quite uncomfortable, and seemed apprehensive about being within the dwelling of Konoha's most powerful family. Considering his background and upbringing, or lack thereof on both fronts, he likely felt completely alien in such a place. "It won't be long. Be patient, Naruto-kun," she replied as they entered through the front door of the main building. The first person they encountered was perhaps the last Hinata had wanted to see so soon into Naruto's visit to the estate. Standing with his back leaned against the wall and a newspaper in one hand was Hiashi Hyuga. At the sight of him, Hinata instantly stopped walking, which prompted her CL mate to do the same. "Well now, this is certainly a surprise," the clan head said as he looked the pair up and down. His gaze lingered far longer on Naruto, and his eyes were scrutinizing, but they also held no malice beyond his general intimidation factor. "I just wanted to show him something of mine, father," Hinata said with a bow. Though he was socially unstructured in most regards, Hiyashi's presence held enough weight that Naruto immediately followed suit. "Fair enough. Try not to disturb the elders. They have a meeting in session down the hall and to the left," the older man informed her. At this, Hinata frowned a bit. "Why are you not in attendance, if I may ask?" she inquired. Hiyashi gave her a tired look and rolled up his newspaper. "Even I grow weary of politics from time to time. They can sort this out without me. It's just a dispute over property lines again," he explained. The heiress nodded and tugged on Naruto's shirt to catch his attention once again. "In that case, we'll be off. Come, Naruto-kun," she urged the boy. Obviously eager to be away from the head of the Hyuga clan, for both the sake of his nerves and his incomplete etiquette, the blonde eagerly followed after her. Once they were out of Hiyashi's earshot, they both relaxed somewhat. "That went quite well. He usually questions my sister far more when she brings friends home. Though, he did seem quite tired this time," she said. Naruto shuddered and scratched the back of his head. "He's scary," he murmured, drawing a slight chuckle from Hinata and a shake of her head. It was the most common reaction to her father, and it was somewhat justified given his status, but she still found it quite amusing given how broadly ordinary the man was underneath his regality. A few moments later, they reached the door to where she had intended to bring Naruto all along. Opting to make sure of something before opening it, Hinata manifested her Byakugan. Seeing that the area was uninhabited for the time being, the heiress let the dojutsu fizzle out and turned to her CLMA. Tay, who was waiting for more prompting. "It's been some time since I've shown somebody this, so, bear with me, okay?" she said quietly. She then opened the door and directed him through it. Once they were both through the entrance, Hinata resumed her role as leader. "Oh, wow, you've got a whole inner area," Naruto said as he scanned his eyes around the inner courtyard of the estate. In the center of it was a small, but well-kept garden area. Hinata then led him to it and into its center, which had a miniature clearing just large enough for people to stand thin. "This is where I like to come to relieve stress. I tinker around with the flowers, water the soil, that kind of thing," she explained while she brushed a finger over a rose. Naruto seemed to be impressed by the garden, as he continually glanced around with a look of thinly veiled awe. "This is fancy. Your gardeners must make a killing off of this," he said. Hinata stopped tending to the flowers and looked back at him. "Actually, this is mine. It was a birthday present from my mother when I was small. I've been caring for it ever since. Though, I think she was a better gardener than I am," she said with a reminiscent smile. Her CL mate seemed to ponder something momentarily. It took Hinata very little time to identify what he was processing. "Yes, was my mother. She passed away several years ago. She was a wonderful woman," she said quietly. Naruto immediately lowered his eyes to the ground and hummed a look of guilt. "I'm sorry for bringing that back," he muttered apologetically. Touched by his concern, The heiress turned to face him fully. You don't need to apologize. My memories of her are happy ones. That's what matters. She urged him. Naruto nodded and met her gaze. Why'd you bring me here? He asked. Hinata remained silent for a moment before reaching forward and taking hold of his hands, both of which were thinly wrapped in bandages. She had noticed the amateur attempt to hide the injuries immediately upon entering his home that morning. To prove a point to you. You told me back at your apartment that you don't want to tell me everything because you're afraid of being hated by me. Well, let me make this perfectly clear to you. I would never. Not in 1,000 years. She began, pausing to allow her words to properly resonate with the boy standing in front of her. I know that you wrapped your hands to try to hide the cuts and blood on them. Probably because you didn't want me to worry about you. There are many people who would flaunt their injuries for attention, but not you. You hid them to save me the stress, or at least, you tried to. She continued. The guilt quickly returned to Naruto's face. I'm sorry. I just didn't want to freak you out again, he said apologetically. Hinata maintained her grip on his bandaged hands. And I appreciate the thought, but you need to understand that I want to know when you're hurting. Seeing you be in pain is torture for me. Bantering with you earlier made me very happy. Seeing flashes of your smile and happiness brings me more joy than I can express, she said kindly. The blonde's expression remained pained. There are just some things I can't tell you. Not now, he said rigidly. The heiress sighed and raised one of his hands up. She then gently kissed his bandaged palm. She then did the same for his other hand. I won't force you to tell me. Just understand that I wouldn't cut you off or push you away. You're precious and unique, Naruto-kun, she said tenderly. Naruto's face was practically glowing red by this point, and he clearly had no idea whatsoever how to respond to such open and sincere affection. I'll think about it. Not right now, though, he said hoarsely. Hinata nodded and let go of his hands. She then smiled once more. When you're ready, I'll listen to all you have to say. Till then, know that you don't need to be ashamed of yourself. I don't consider you to be less than anybody else. Quite the opposite, she said. Naruto swallowed a lump in his throat and glanced around at the flowers and plants. You said you liked to press flowers earlier. Could you show me what you mean by that? He requested in an attempt to change the subject. The heiress' smile brightened at the question. I would love to. Hinata smiled to herself as she put the finishing touches on the sketch. It had taken a fair amount of time to reach the point of near completion, but based upon what she was seeing now that she had opted to view the drawing broadly, the work would be worth it. I really should try drawing his whole form soon. As much as I like his face, there is more to him than that, she thought to herself. It was a bit past 11 o'clock, and Naruto had returned to his bedroom to sleep after a predictably stubborn breakfast. His resistances to her offerings of food each morning were growing less and less frivolous, but they were still present. It would take time, but progress was progress. In general, she was feeling optimistic regarding his state. The previous day had marked the most open she had ever seen him in recent times, and she had even managed to catch him smiling once or twice. It brought her great satisfaction and joy to see light returning to his eyes. It was also heartening to know that her father wasn't opposed to his presence. Kissing his hands may have been a bridge too far, but he didn't complain. Hinata thought to herself. The action itself had been fairly tame. A simple gesture of care, and one that was quite common only a few decades prior. But she knew all too well just how foreign such a thing was to Naruto. It was less a romantic gesture than a motherly one in context, but both intentions would be mostly unknown to the blonde in terms of personal experience. A thought then occurred to her. He's mostly unresponsive to words of encouragement. They clearly make him think, but they don't cheer him up, she pondered. Her face quickly gained a subtle degree of color at the notion of the solution she silently concocted within her mind. It isn't inappropriate, but how good an idea is it? He's so badly stunted emotionally, she debated silently. Shaking her head with a sigh and patting her cheeks to dispel the heat in them, Hinata returned her attention to her art. When you come out again, I'll see how I feel, she muttered to the still sleeping boy in the next room over. For the following 90 minutes, she imbued a level of detail into her sketch of Naruto that she had never previously attempted. It was an enthralling experience, as drawing him always tended to be for the heiress. Her artistic indulgence only ended when the sound of the bedroom door opening keyed itself into her eardrums. As expected, when she turned around in her chair to face the hallway, her CL mate stood just outside Hi's bedroom with a tired look on his face. He was still in the very same pajamas he had been wearing upon his initial awakening earlier in the day, and his hair was equally as messy. Despite the lack of polish to his appearance, Hinata still found it to be endlessly endearing. At the sight of him, the heiress stood up and walked to the boy. "Good afternoon, Naruto-kun." She greeted him as he attempted to blink his eyes free of their heaviness. Though he began to respond, his words were interrupted by a yawn. The involuntary slip-up finally convinced Hinata to do what she had been considering beforehand. Ignoring her nerves, Hinata stepped forward and wrapped him up in a tight hug. "What are you?" Naruto started, trailing off as he was softly squeezed around the abdomen. The heiress peered up at him from under his chin and smiled jovially. "I'm glad you're awake again," she said kindly. Her CL mate blinked several times with a puzzled look on his face, but he made no action to push her away. "It's only been a few hours, you know," he grumbled awkwardly. The heiress shrugged her shoulders and released him, but kept her hands on his shoulders. "Be that as it may, I'm still happy to see you again. You look well rested," she said. Naruto shrugged and rubbed his eyes wearily. "I'm still exhausted. I'm just coming out for water," he said. The Hyuga girl shook her head and steered him toward the table rather than the fridge, where she knew his supply of water bottles to be. "No, I think it's time that you eat lunch, Naruto-kun," she corrected him. The blonde scowled and gave her an irritated look. "I haven't been eating lunch up to now, and I'm fine," he argued pointlessly. Hinata simply shook her head and gently sat him into one of the chairs. "And you'll be even better once you start eating more than once per day. You're awfully underweight right now," she said. Naruto rolled his eyes and loosely leaned his cheek on his palm as the heiress produced pre-prepared food from the bag she always brought along with her. "You say that like you know what I should be weighing," he grumbled under his breath. His words coincided with Hinata turning around to bring the food she had readied for him. "Not down to the number, but I shouldn't be able to see the outlines of your cheekbones so easily, and your ribs shouldn't dig into my stomach when I hug you," she countered bluntly. Naruto glanced down at his abdomen and twitched subtly. "If you don't like feeling it, then don't hug me," he said quietly. The heiress' expression softened a bit as she set the food down in front of him. It was fried fish, which to her knowledge, he had never eaten before. "I didn't mean it that way. I just want you to be healthy. I can't have you starving on me," she said. Her CL mate looked back up from the floor and eyed his food. Fully prepared to engage in one of the many games of back and forth they tended to play when it came to Naruto's meals, Hinata sighed and began to rise from her chair. Much to her surprise, he took a bite from his chopsticks without complaint. "You're still confusing to me," he said vaguely while he chewed the fish slowly so as to discern a concrete opinion on the new food. Hinata settled across the table from him and gave a quizzical look. "In what way?" "I've tried quite hard to be straightforward," she asked curiously. The blonde looked at her head on for the first time in several minutes and absently fiddled with his chopsticks. "That's what I mean. You're so much more talkative. You're actually, like, pushing me to do things. You barely had a personality back at school," he said. Hinata instantly felt her mood crash downward. She caught herself before it could become overwhelming, but it had damaged her spirits nonetheless. "I'm quite shy. I still am. Doing all of this for you has been a great help in that regard, but I still get nervous. I'm sorry to have been so bland before," she muttered dejectedly. In a flash of life quite foreign to his present state, Naruto immediately seemed to realize the impact his words had had on the girl. "I shouldn't have said it that way. I just meant that you were really quiet is all. Not everybody is as loud and obnoxious as me. Please don't feel bad," he said frantically. Hinata's darkened expression slowly gave way to a long gaze. "You never change, Naruto-kun. Even now, you're still the same," she said wistfully. The blonde frowned and made a failed attempt to decipher the meaning behind her words. "You hate it when other people are in pain. So much so that you immediately tear yourself down to make them feel better by comparison. I've seen you do it 1,000 times, even when all you get in return is a glare and an insult. Hinata continued when she realized that he was without a response. She then pursed her lips. I really should have recognized it as a sign of how much you were hurting inside. I've never heard you say something nice about yourself. Even when you preach about wanting to become Hokage, it's always about others, not yourself. The Hyuga girl said. Naruto blankly took another bite of his fish. Yeah, so what? He shot back robotically. Her words had struck a chord, and she knew it. Not a particularly positive one, clearly, but it mattered little. He was now listening, even if he was far from joyful. You hate yourself, don't you, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked. It pained her immensely to even speak such words, but she knew all too well what could happen if she let any stones go unturned. For a time, Naruto did not respond. It was a predictable reaction. Admittance to self-loathing was no easy feat, especially to another person. At least somebody finally figured it out. He said numbly, standing up from the table and turning his attention toward the bedroom in the hallway. The heiress quickly scrambled to her feet and scurried in front of him to cut off his ability to shut himself away. Instead of simply trying to push her aside, Naruto turned around and made a short walk to the couch, which he laid down on with his face pressed into the cushion. Oh, Naruto-kun, Hinata whispered as she stared across the room at his motionless form. He was shutting himself down emotionally. She knew why, though the reason still disturbed her greatly. At least he isn't hurting himself. Yet, anyway, she thought to herself sadly. She then followed her immediate instinct and briskly made her way over to Naruto. At first, she simply stood over him. Please say something, she requested softly. In return, all she got was a slight curling of his posture. During the shift, she had briefly caught sight of his face. It bore a look of shame. At this, the heiress slowly inserted herself onto the small slice of remaining space on the edge of the couch. She then wrapped her arms around his midsection to anchor herself. Don't hate who you are. You of all people should be proud of yourself. Because who you are is beautiful. I'll say it as many times as I need to. I'll hug you as many times as I need to. I'll take as much time as I need to, she whispered in his ear as her chin rested on his shoulder from behind. Though he made no sounds, Hinata could feel him tense, and then shudder. His jaw was tightened and his body was shaking. Cry if you must. I'll stay right here. If you were worth hating, I wouldn't be here whispering to you right now. If you were anywhere near as disgusting as you clearly think you are, I'd have abandoned you on the first day. But you aren't disgusting or hateable, so here I am. Hinata tenderly expressed. Then, something odd happened. Over time, at a gradual pace, he relaxed completely and his breathing evened. He had fallen asleep. Be it from exhaustion or contentment, it brought the heiress great relief to know that he was at least resting. Consciousness would have only led to a prolonged mental torture. Alongside this relief came a new level of filtration to Hinata. Or rather, a lack thereof. And I do it all, because I love you. Naruto lay awake as he stared up at the ceiling of his small living room. For all that he had grounds to complain about regarding his living conditions, heating was luckily not one of them. In the dead of winter, with the temperature nearly reaching zero outside, his apartment remained serviceably warm. Air conditioning was another story entirely, but sweltering heat was far more survivable than bitter cold. Now, though, he wasn't thinking about the temperature. He was still laying on his couch, and had been since roughly noon that same day. It was now 11:30 at night, and Hinata had left roughly 2 hours beforehand. She had remained latched to his back for quite some time, given that she was still holding him when he awoke at 5 in the evening earlier in the day. She had eventually peeled herself off of him, but only to cover him with a blanket and sit quietly by his side near the couch for the final hour of her stay. Her commitment was completely unshakable, it seemed. Be it laying in silence for hours on end, practically force-feeding him in an effort to keep him healthy, or even taking the tedious steps to teach him how to press flowers, Hinata Hyuga never faltered. She possessed a bloody, single-minded determination to do what she deemed necessary to lift him up time and time again. It was puzzling. Because who you are is beautiful. Her words had grown more intensely positive and affectionate as time had gone on, and the longer they trended in that direction, the more deeply they cut into him. He still couldn't fully understand what they meant or why she insisted so fervently on saying them, but they elicited emotions in him that were entirely new. Slowly rolling into an upright posture, Naruto threw his feet over the side of the couch and sat up. Why are you so bent on breaking me open and making me talk? Why do you care if I hate myself or not? It doesn't affect you or your life if I do or don't, he questioned in his silence with his arms resting on his knees. A heavy sigh then dragged out of him. And why do you always do weird things like hugging me and holding me? Why won't you just come out and explain it all to me when I ask? He pondered. At the thought, the feeling of Hinata's arms locked around his upper stomach returned to him briefly. After a brief moment of processing, he found that now that he was without it, he greatly missed the sensation. How cute. You've been given your first taste of physical affection, and now you don't know what to do with yourself. Came a dark voice. It was the last thing Naruto wanted to hear, but he had learned the hard way that he had no real control over when and where the grating tones of the ancient being would emerge. Off. The blonde growled to the voice. A sanguinary laugh shivered through Naruto's mind and body in response to his harsh retort. You aren't exactly eloquent, but your occasional flashes of vulgarity never cease to pleasantly surprise me. Maybe you do have a spine. The ancient being mocked sarcastically. Naruto focused himself on breathing evenly to calm his nerves. It's my body, my rules. You're stuck in that box. You're all talk. He hissed back. The boy's head then pulsated with dull pain, causing him to instantly clutch his temples. Am I really? The dark voice countered as the blonde's skull throbbed. Naruto bared his teeth in the dark and took in mediating breaths. A headache isn't going to break me, he said as firmly as he could. His defiance earned him another punishment in the form of his nails sharpening and lengthening. Due to his hands having been tightly gripping his own legs, his claws dug into his skin through his pants. Flinching at the pain, he quickly pulled his hands away from his body and stood up. Maybe not, but you can only endure for so long. Your choices are limited. You can either remain conscious and contend with this, or you can sleep and relive a few of my favorite memories of yours. Take your pick. The entity replied. Though he began to respond, Naruto thought better of it and instead made his way to his bathroom. After a painstakingly slow walk, he entered the room and shut the door behind him. He then went to work trying to clean the minor wounds on his legs. This is as much resistance as you've ever put up. Perhaps you've outgrown simple goading, the ancient voice said as the boy painfully rubbed his bloodied thigh with a wet towel. Naruto simply ignored him and continued to do as he had been doing. There was no point in engaging. It had never ended well before, and that dynamic hadn't changed one bit. Easily detecting this shift in approach, the dark entity went silent for a time. Though he remained apprehensive, Naruto allowed himself to relax somewhat as seeming solitude set in. Once he was satisfied with the state of the cuts on his legs, the blonde shut off the bathroom light and exited the room. He then made his way to the fridge, retrieving a bottle of water with great caution so as not to puncture it with his now serrated nails. With the water firmly in hand, he walked back to his bedroom and entered. He had spent less time in his bedroom that day than any other in the previous 30 days, though most of it had still been spent laying in inert stillness. He briefly tried to find ironic humor in that fact, but chose to keep his thinking to as low a level as was possible. Once he was settled on the mattress again, however, his least favorite voice chimed in one final time. I have a question for you, Naruto, the ancient being said vaguely. The blonde kept his silence defiantly. Chuckling a bit, the entity continued regardless. Would you like to know how your mother died? You sent for me, father. Hiashi gave a curt nod and fought the urge to rub his eyes. It was exceptionally early, hardly 5 in the morning, but the topic at hand required such an early meeting. Given that Hinata tended to be long gone by 6:30 most mornings. I did, yes. Please sit, Hinata. He replied. The girl did as she was told and sat primly across from him at the dining table. Once they were both situated, the older man took a deep breath to begin relaying what he had called her fourth four. I'm afraid that you won't be able to watch over Naruto Uzumaki today. For reasons I'll elaborate on shortly, you'll be entirely preoccupied today. he began. As expected, Hinata's expression immediately soured, and a look of frustrated puzzlement quickly overtook her features. Go on, she said rigidly. Somewhat impressed by her ability to hold her tongue, the clan head folded his hands in his lap and glanced to either side of them to determine how legitimate their privacy truly was. Much to my chagrin, and clearly yours, the elders have called for you to undergo a day-long examination. Taijutsu, basic academia, clan structure, the works. As for why, it's because they severely doubt the quality of your education due to you practically homeschooling yourself at present. He explained. Hinata's left eye twitched. Do you share those feelings, father? She asked as respectfully as she could. Hiyashi considered the question momentarily, but soon shook his head. I'm of the unpopular opinion that learning at a personalized pace can be beneficial, so no, I don't. Believe me, I tried my best to talk them out of it. I managed to push it back a few days, even, but they were insistent, he said sympathetically. Hinata's hands tightened into fists at her sides as her knuckles dug into the matted floor. Now is the worst time for something so petty. I don't trust him on his own. Not one bit. She said darkly. The older man frowned and eyed his daughter intently. Has he worsened? He asked slowly. The heiress kept her eyes glued to the wooden table as she appeared to consider her words. After a time, she spoke. He's openly admitted to self-loathing, and he's harmed himself more than once. He's becoming more receptive to me, but he's no less volatile mentally. Leaving him alone for a day feels very unwise, she said. Hiyashi pursed his lips. Is he at risk of suicide? Be honest. He pressed. Hinata tensed visibly at the question, clearly disturbed by the thought of the boy she so clearly adored ending his own life. I don't think so. At least, I haven't seen anything that makes me think he would be. He hasn't said anything to suggest that it's on his mind, she said a tad shakily. The clan head exhaled through his nose and glanced up at the clock. They were short on time. Uruka is likely already in the academy building, and it's far too short notice to find a replacement for him. I'll send a branch member to inform Naruto of your absence, he said. The heiress swallowed nervously. I still don't like the idea. I really don't think he'll be safe, she said quietly. Hiyashi stood up from his seat and made his way over to her, prompting the girl to rise to meet him. He then put a hand on her shoulder. All we can do is hope. I understand your concern, and I take pride in your empathy, but this is out of your control for now, he said gently. The heiress sighed and turned toward the door of the kitchen. When does my testing begin? She asked numbly. The older man studied her carefully before answering her simple question. In 20 minutes, just about. I'd suggest stretching beforehand. The first phase will be taijutsu, he informed her, earning a stiff nod from his daughter. She then briskly exited the room. Once she was gone, Hiyashi sighed. Keep your head, Naruto. She'll blame herself if you do anything rash. Naruto stared straight ahead of him as the sun peeked through his mostly closed curtains. He had not slept a wink. He was utterly exhausted, but his body refused to shut itself down. He hadn't even managed to change his position for all 8 of the hours that he had been on the mattress. As he had been when he initially came to the mattress, he was sitting with his knees drawn up to his chin. The human mind was the ultimate abyss of torment. It was capable of invoking more pain than any weapon or spoken word. He had very nearly drowned in the depths of his own psyche that night. Literally and figuratively. There had been points at which he had forgotten to breathe, and he had mentally collapsed in on himself several times. Hellish was an understatement. Numbness was his friend, as it had dulled the physical damage to the point of it being a non-factor in adding to his discomfort. His nails had returned to their usual length roughly 2 hours prior, but up till that point, they had done their job. Most of the damage had been done to his hands, largely due to him keeping them clenched into fists for much of the night despite the claws on the ends of his fingers. Try as he might to resist the urge, he had also scratched violently at his chest and forearms more than once. The blood had dried, but it was still very visible. Naruto felt very little. The early stages of visceral pain and emotion had given way to total dissociation. Above all else, however, he was mentally shot. He no longer had any desire to clean himself up the way he had less than 4 hours previously. All that remained were his autonomous functions. He breathed periodically, he occasionally shifted to ease his joints, and his heart beat in his chest. Nothing more, nothing less. If cold water were to suddenly be splashed on his face, the closest thing to a reaction may have been to blink the liquid from his eyes. One thing was bothering him, however. It was a few minutes past 9 in the morning, and Hinata had yet to arrive at his apartment. If it had been a Saturday or Sunday, Naruto would have blown it off as an unspoken caveat of the heiress' arrangement to stay in his apartment during the day, but it was still 2 days short of the weekend. In the spirit of his never-ending, newfound pessimism, the blonde's mind easily twisted the information. She says all this crap about being there for me, and then bails less than a week in. All I did was sleep, too. That's a new low for me. He thought to himself, a bitter chuckle escaping him as he pondered the worst possible scenario as though it were a set reality. In the farthest reaches of his mind, a small voice screamed that he was wrong, but the voice was quickly and brutally suppressed. The torment had taken its toll. Despite what he told himself, despite the numbness and nihilism, he still patiently waited for the sound of the door to his apartment to open. Try as the ancient being living within him might, he could not purge the small spark of hope that he would be shown care so on. For as much as he had been broken down, who he was at his core remained. A person who looked forward. A person who wished to be successful. These truths of his personality lacked the strength to surface, but they retained their ability to keep him alive. Unfortunately, Hinata never came that day. Hinata briskly made her way up the stairs of Naruto's apartment. She hadn't a minute to waste. Within her own mind, at least. The previous day had been chaotic, and had prevented her from taking to her usual duties at the blonde's dwelling. For the most part, her stress was unfounded, for her father had sent a branch Hyuga to inform Naruto of the reasoning behind her absence. She strongly disliked members of the main house giving orders to those of the branch house, but Naruto's condition was severe enough for it to be warranted, by her estimation. I hope they were polite. Depressed as he is, I suspect Naruto-kun's temper is still intact, she thought to herself as she reached his front door. With a quick twist of the key, she stepped inside and closed the entrance behind her. Once inside, the Hyuga girl was immediately struck by how still it all felt. It was certainly quite early in the morning, so the silence was more than justifiable, but something felt off. Something was missing. Suddenly feeling the urge to check on her CL mate, Hinata made her way to the door of his bedroom and knocked on it. Oddly, and unsettlingly, the force of her knuckle on the wood pushed the door open a touch. It was not only unlocked, but already a crack open. Though her knee-jerk reaction was to simply open it all the way, something in her gut told her that she may come to regret the decision. She quickly brushed her intuition aside and used her elbow to gently open the door. For better or worse, her gut had been telling her the truth. Sitting with his back to the bed frame, a bloodied, tattered shirt hanging from his upper body, and a look completely void of emotion on his face was Naruto. Her entrance seemed to have roused him somewhat, as while his face was blank, his eyes were indeed trained on her. For several moments, Hinata stood in disturbed silence as she struggled to process the horror before her. "You came," he eventually said in a monotone voice. There was no life in his tone. No personality. No vigor. They were robotic words. Dead words. Hinata then began to shake. It was a nightmare. A horrifying vision of something she perceived to be hellish. It wasn't long before the tears predictably crashed through any defenses she had previously erected. She did not sob. She simply let the burning tears drag down her face. The messenger had not come. He had not been notified. And the results were far worse than she possibly could have imagined. "You can leave if it's too much," Naruto said numbly. His words snapped her from her silent trance. In an instant, Hinata burst forward and came down upon him with all of her body weight. She didn't care one bit about the bloody stains on her jacket or the fact that she was being so physically forward. The only thought on her mind was the boy in front of her. Why? Just why? Why are you doing this to yourself? Are you trying to hurt me? Because if you are, it's working. She wailed tearfully as she bared down over the blonde, who was now flat on his back with Hinata pinning his wrists to the mattress. Her emotions were violently intense, and they consisted almost entirely of despair and anger. Despair at the pain Naruto was clearly in, and anger at the horrible truth of how little he seemed to value his own life. I did my best. I really did, he said quietly. It was then that Hinata took a long, hard look at his injuries. There were brutal scratch marks all up his arms and across his chest. They stopped just below his throat. There was a story to be told in the cuts. Any and all vital areas had been avoided, but only barely. Whatever terrible experience Naruto had lived through the day before had come dangerously close to being fatal, and from the inflection of his words, he had fought viciously to keep it below that threshold. Please tell me what's going on. This isn't mere depression. There's something else going on. Be honest with me, Naruto-kun. I can't stand this. I can't help you if I don't know the truth. Hinata pressed as she suppressed her urge to completely break down into tears. Naruto shook his head. He was staring right through her. I can't let you know. I don't want you to go away. I don't like being hated, he replied. Hinata tightened her grips on his wrists and stared hard at his dull eyes. Don't make me laugh. You have no idea how much it would take. I'm quite a fan of yours. Your biggest, I'd say. She shot back as firmly as she could. For a time, Naruto simply laid limply in his silence. Eventually, he began to speak. Take a look at the tattoo on my stomach, he said vaguely. Frustrated as she was by the lack of straightness to the answer, the heiress did as she was told and activated her Byakugan. Out of respect for the blonde, she had never used her eyes to view his body directly before, and as such, what she saw when her dojutsu pierced through his tattered clothing was jarring. There was a containment seal printed on her Cielmade's stomach. Why is there orange chakra centered in it? What does that mean? She whispered aloud as she tried and failed to understand what exactly she was looking at. Her head was then turned back up by the blonde's voice. What's my birthday, Hinata? He asked. The Hyuga's response was instant and confident, as she had memorized the date long ago. October 10th. She said automatically. For a brief time, she was unable to follow the trail of breadcrumbs Naruto had laid out for her. The mystery did not hold up for long when the cogs of her mind began to even slightly turn. The conclusion she came to made far too much sense. Apparently, she did a poor job of hiding her shock. Pretty wild, huh? It surprised the hell out of me too. Naruto said britly. Emotion had finally returned to his voice, but not in a healthy form. He sounded utterly defeated. There was even a trace of fear laced into the undertone. They all avoid you because of the, she began, trailing off into silence out of sheer shock and awe. The information being presented to her gave context to so many things she had witnessed that it made the heiress head spin. Demon brat, fox devil, little monster. Those are the clicks. That's right, you've got it exactly, Hinata. The nine-tailed fox never died. He was never beaten. He was put inside of me the day I was born. I'm a monster. The blonde clarified with an odd look on his face. The Hyuga girl mouthed something, but it was far too quiet for the blonde to hear. 5 more times, she did the same thing. Mouthing silent words. I'll tell Iruka-sensei that you got behind on your homework. He'll understand. We don't have to let this leave this room if you don't want it to. You can forget all about me, Naruto suggested. Hinata's silent mouthings then explosively increased in volume. You're not a monster. You're a boy, she yelled uncharacteristically. The sheer intensity of her voice caused Naruto to flinch. The heiress paid his unease no heed and seized the sides of his face with her hands. You're a wonderful, lovable, kind boy. You're not a monster, she yelled once again, adding further superlatives to drive her point home. Her face was hardly more than 2 inches from his own, and he could feel her rapid breath on his face. Her expression held boundless contempt, but not for him. It was directed toward his oppressors. If you ever call yourself a monster again, I'll introduce you to the palm of my hand. You're precious and endearing. You're handsome and cute. I could go on and on. You are not a monster or a freak, she hissed through clenched teeth. Her reaction clearly had absolutely not been what Naruto had been expecting. He was completely tongue-tied and at a total loss. If what you're saying is true, and the village treats you so terribly because of something so far out of your control, then I'll be relegating myself to interacting with my family and you. Nobody else. They aren't worth my time or yours. Hinata continued bluntly. She had calmed outwardly, but a fury was still burning within her. All of the hours she had spent watching him, all of the tears she had seen him shed, they had all been a result of nothing more than scapegoating. Why? Why are you being this way? Everybody else, they all just, Naruto began, losing his voice well before he could finish the thought. The Hyuga girl lightened her grip on the sides of his face and maintained firm eye contact with him. You know what? Since you told me the truth, I'll do the same. I'm not dancing around this any longer, she said shortly. Rather than continuing to speak, Hinata simply crushed her lips to his and clamped her eyes shut. Naruto made an odd squeaking sound in response. After several moments, Hinata broke the kiss and left her forehead to rest on his. You're worth so much more than you think, she said with conviction. At first, the blonde did nothing more than stare up at her blankly. He was overloaded. Slowly but surely, he processed all that had happened and been said. When he did, for the first time since Hinata's arrival as his caretaker, he began to cry. He was completely drained. He had no more strength left with which to contain his pain. Oh, come here, you. Hinata said as she scooped him up and pressed his face into her chest. Naruto immediately clung onto her and openly sobbed. It was an entire ocean of neglect and loneliness. He keeps telling me about all of the people he slaughtered during his rampage. He even told me how he killed my mom, he stammered tearfully. Hinata felt her heart break in several places. He's also told me that he wants to do it all again. He threatened you. IW wanted to make sure my body was too ripped up for him to be able to use it. The blonde whimpered. This revelation in particular sent the heiress entirely over the edge. That's why you hurt yourself so badly, she practically whispered. Naruto gave an almost imperceptible nod. At this, Hinata tightened her grip on him and ran a hand through his hair. If you're anything other than human, you're an angel, not a demon. They've got it all wrong. You keep the fox under control. You keep them all safe. And when you thought there was a chance of me being in danger, you tore yourself apart to try to stop it, she declared, struggling a bit to get the last part out. She then gently lifted his head up to face her. But please, don't do this to yourself. Don't hurt yourself. Don't put your body through this. You matter just as much as I do. You have no idea how much it breaks my heart to see you like this, she pleaded with him. I don't know what else to do, Naruto replied sadly. Hinata shook her head and released him before standing up. Treating your body like a whipping post isn't the answer. I don't have a solution for the fox, but I'll say this. You being his container doesn't make it okay for you to completely abandon yourself. Stand strong. Maintain your identity. Be your own person. Don't let him define you, she said strongly. The blonde sat up on the edge of the bed and sighed heavily. That was a hell of a lot easier before I learned that everybody had a good reason to hate me, he said glumly. A split second later, he was slapped across the face. What the hell was that for? I didn't even call myself a monster or anything, Naruto complained as he rubbed his cheek. The heiress grabbed him under his arms and stood him up with surprising strength. You were thinking it, and I won't let you wallow in self-loathing. Now, I'm going to give you two choices, she said vaguely. Though he was still somewhat irritated from having been slapped, Naruto gestured for her to continue. You can either stay here, or you can come stay at the Hyuga estate. If you choose to stay, I'll be moving for the time being as your roommate. If you choose to stay at the Hyuga estate, you'll be sleeping in my room, and you'll be accompanied by me at all times. Take your pick, Hinata said as she held him by the shoulders in front of herself. Her mate furrowed his brow. Why would I agree to either of those things? He shot back defensively. The Hyuga girl remained unwavering and kept him still with her hands. It isn't a matter of agreeing. It's a matter of choosing which ultimatum you like better. This isn't up for debate. From here on out, you're not leaving my sight, she said firmly. Naruto opened his mouth to retort, but seemed to think better of it when he hung his head. I'll stay here. I don't want to screw up your home life, he muttered tiredly. Hinata's grip on him softened at this. You wouldn't be damaging anything by being a guest in my home, but if it makes you more comfortable, I'll come to you instead. Father likes you, And he understands your situation somewhat, so I'm confident he'll let me. She urged him. The blonde then lifted his head again to reveal a weary expression. Why'd you kiss me, Hinata? He asked out of the blue. The question spoke 1,000 words. Contrary to the norm, the heiress did not blush or stutter. Instead, she simply gazed at him and gave an honest smile. Because you were spiraling, and I needed to get it across to you that you're loved and worthy of care. I adore you, Naruto Uzumaki, she said sweetly. The blonde blinked several times. I really don't know what to say to that. I don't know what it feels like to love somebody. Or really to be loved, honestly. He said, his tone conflicted. Hinata's hands then drifted up to his face once again. To love is to care for another more than yourself. Which is exactly why I don't care about the fox or the danger you think he poses to me. I'll stay here with you, no matter what comes my way, she said softly. She then let her hands drop from his face. I know you don't feel the way I do, and that's okay. I have no right to expect that of you. Just take it as a sign that you're just as important as anyone else, she said quietly. Naruto remained silent and unmoving for several seconds before finally speaking. I'll think on it. I really can't give a good answer either way. I need to figure some stuff out. Give me time, okay? He said. Hinata felt a spark of hope ignite itself in her, but she pushed it down in favor of logical thinking. When you're ready to discuss this again, I'll be waiting for you. No matter what your answer may be, the heiress said. Naruto nodded and winced as his cuts throbbed. Easily noticing his discomfort, Hinata pointed to his dresser. Get dressed. I'm taking you to the estate. We have our own medics. She half suggested, half ordered. Her Cielmade's expression instantly became apprehensive. Are you sure they'd even heal me? He asked skeptically. Hinata nodded confidently and began walking toward the door of his bedroom so as to give him privacy. Oh, don't worry about that. They'll do their job. They know how unpleasant I can be when I'm angry. Besides, I have hell to raise with them already. Hiyashi straightened his robes and took a deep breath before opening the sliding door before him. With slow, measured steps, he entered the room. As he had been informed of prior, the scene was bleak. Naruto Uzumaki was seated on the floor, his shirt cast aside. At either side of him were two of the main house's most prominent medical specialists, who were both making careful stitches across an inordinate amount of cuts and scratches. Some were deeper than others, but they all bled. Also present in the room was Hinata, who was sitting in a chair just behind the blonde with her hands rigidly folded in her lap. Her gaze was firmly fixed on her own legs with her eyes hidden behind her bangs. She was visibly struggling. The sight garnered a wave of sympathy to wash over the older man. He quickly regained his composure and silently observed the care being provided to the young boy. They were doing their jobs, and they were doing them well. After several minutes, the medics stepped away from Naruto. We've done all that we can. Most of it has been mended by medical jutsu, but we're opting to let gauze and a few stitches do the work for some of it. Hideo Hyuga, the medic to Naruto's left, said with a bow. Hiyashi nodded and looked the blonde up and down. Upon finding that he was satisfied with his condition, he gestured toward the door. Leave us. I'd like to speak with him, he ordered. The pair of medics did as they were told and briskly exited the room. All that remained was Naruto and Hinata. Sensing the oncoming argument that was bound to occur, Hiyashi eyed his daughter intently. That means you, Hinata. I'll only be a few minutes, he said. The heiress shook her head and remained in her seat. For the first time since Hiyashi's arrival, Naruto spoke. It's okay, Hinata. There's nothing to worry about. He urged her as firmly as he could. The girl finally looked up from her lap and met his eyes. I already told you. You're not leaving my sight. I meant that. She countered with a surprising degree of abrasiveness. Hiyashi observed the interaction for a moment before stepping forward and clearing his throat. Let me be your eyes for now, then. There's something I must do before I come to a decision regarding your suggested arrangement. He cut in. When his daughter shot him a look of defiance, the clan head narrowed his eyes and stood a bit taller. This isn't up for debate. Go to the kitchen, and stay there until I come retrieve you, he said authoritatively. Despite her clear dislike of the notion, the girl knew better than to disrespect her father repeatedly. With great reluctance, Hinata rose from her chair and began to head for the door. Before she exited, however, she knelt down in front of Naruto and placed a kiss on his forehead. She then swiftly left the space. Hiashi intently asked Naruto's reaction to the affectionate gesture. The boy's face had reddened a tad, and he clearly wasn't entirely used to being treated in such a way, but he also did not appear offended in any way. I hope you understand that she holds you in exceptionally high regard, the older man said as Naruto regained his wits and relaxed a bit. The blonde slowly rose to his feet, flinching a bit as his stitches visibly ached. She made that real clear to me. She yelled at me until I understood, he muttered. Hiashi raised an eyebrow and stepped back so as to give the boy space to gain his bearings. Did she now? She did seem quite tightly wound just now. I'm umming you argued before she brought you here? He asked. Naruto nodded and let out a sigh. About the fox, correct? The clan head inquired calmly. The academy student instantly tensed and looked on at the older man fearfully. Hiashi put up a hand and shook his head. I've been aware of it since long before you were, and I hardly care. Though, your reaction tells me that you aren't especially comfortable with the knowledge yet. Naruto took several deep breaths to calm himself down before collapsing backwards onto the chair Hinata had recently occupied. How could I be? It ruined everything. The way I look at myself, the way I look at other people, everything. I used to think they just didn't like that I was loud, but now I know that they have a good reason, he said glumly. Hiashi remained on his feet and gathered his thoughts. You do realize that the vast majority of your CL mates aren't actually aware, right? Much like their politics, children your age haven't a clue as to why they feel the way they do about you. They're simply emulating your parents, he said pointedly. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. It still sucks. You try getting made fun of every day for no reason. It'd get to you too, he replied tiredly. Much to his surprise, Hiashi simply nodded. I'm sure it would, and I can't claim to fully understand how you feel, but what I can say is that anybody with a functioning ability to reason would quickly realize that you aren't the thing they should be hating, he said. Naruto pursed his lips and drummed his fingers on the arm of the chair. Hinata said something like that. I guess it makes sense, but that doesn't change the way I'm treated, he said sadly. It was a fair point, and one that Hiashi recognized. Opting to change the topic somewhat, the older man shifted focus. How exactly did Hinata react to the knowledge of you being the fox's container? Be detailed, he asked curiously. The blonde leaned back in his seat and seemed to lose himself in thought momentarily. She went quiet at first, and just kinda muttered to herself. Then I told her that I'd understand if she wanted to stop checking on me. She started yelling after I said that. She screamed about how stupid I was to think I was a monster, and then he began, going quiet before he could finish the last section. Then she kissed me. It was sorta sudden, so I just laid there. After that, she made me come here to get patched up, he concluded after a break of silence between thoughts. The clan head nodded along throughout. Well, that certainly explains some things, but it also sounds about like what I expected. For several years now, she's had eyes for you, he replied. Naruto did a double take at the revelation. Wait, what? Are you serious? He asked skeptically. Hiashi chuckled and shook his head at the boy's sheer density. She's hardly subtle, my young friend. She even tried to give you hints. It's only proper for a girl to refer to her male CL mates properly in most cases, but for whatever reason, she's always referred to them very, very formally. With you, she's always tacked on that honorific she's so fond of. Beyond that, I'm sure you remember the Valentine's Day incident, he said humorously. Naruto stared at him blankly for a number of seconds before hanging his head. You make it all sound so obvious. Maybe it was. I'm just not all that great with people, he replied quietly. The older man nodded in agreement. Neither is she. The odds were never favorable when it came to the two of you coming together. I suppose you could call it fate that she was called on to be your supervisor. All of that aside, I personally have no problem with you, and neither does the rest of this clan as far as I'm concerned, he said firmly. The pair then lapsed into silence. For a time, nothing was said, but the streak was eventually broken by Naruto. What's the real reason you sent her out of the room? Nothing you said here is anything she doesn't already know. He asked pointedly. At this, Hiyashi's expression darkened. Come out, devil. I can feel you dwelling just beneath his skin, he commanded sharply. Though he initially wore a look of uneasy confusion, Naruto quickly doubled over in pain as his skull erupted with searing anguish. Forgive me, Naruto, but I need to confirm something. The older man thought sympathetically as Naruto convulsed. Mercifully, the process stopped in less than a minute, leaving the blonde sitting upright with his neck limp and head hanging. When he came to a moment later, a clear change had occurred. Weak as he is, forcing my way to the surface still took months of work, came the voice of a demon. Hiyashi felt his blood run cold. The tones and inflections of the words weren't human. They outwardly sounded like they could be, but their essence screamed of a darkness no mortal man could possess naturally. So you finally speak. I must say, your voice doesn't exactly match his frame. He replied as calmly as he could. It was then that Naruto's eyes opened. They were blood red with slitted pupils. You have no idea how much it pains me to be looking up at an insect like you rather than the other way around. But that's neither here nor there. Why is it that you called me forth? The fox asked with a half-lidded smirk. The clan head held eye contact with the ancient atrocity. Why are you tormenting him? What do you stand to gain? He questioned bluntly. The demon folded one of his legs over the other and studied his serrated nails. That should be a fairly simple mystery to solve. What would a great, powerful being like myself desire given my situation? He riddled casually. The clan head folded his arms across his chest and scowled. You're more likely to drive him to suicide than convince him to unleash you. I don't know him particularly well, but he doesn't strike me as the type to endanger those around him to quell his own pain. He countered. The fox glanced up from his nails and let his fangs show in the form of a sick grin. I know him better than he knows himself. I've been a part of him since his infancy. He despises them for what they've done to him. He suppresses it, but he's never been above wishing an early grave upon his tormentors. With enough prompting, I'm sure he'll oblige, he said confidently. Before Hiyashi could retort, something unexpected happened. For the briefest of moments, the demon's red eyes reverted back to their original blue color. So you've finally grown a spine. I'm almost proud of you. The fox hissed as he gripped the side of his head. Hiyashi looked on with slightly wide eyes as Naruto silently fought back for control of his body. After struggling for a number of moments, the ancient being looked back to the clan head. We'll continue this another day. I can't do two things at once. He growled before going limp once more. Like before, the boy awoke quickly, and when he did, a change had occurred. Luckily for the both of them, it was a positive one. Why'd you have to do that, huh? Naruto grumbled in a pained tone. A stream of blood then began to leak from his nose. At the sight, Hiyashi's expression softened. The amount of effort it must have taken to battle his way back into control is staggering. His body can hardly take it, he thought, a touch of regret finding its way into his emotional spectrum. I needed to confirm his intentions. They were more or less what I figured they would be, but a verbatim account has given more faith in my own ability to plan for the worst. He replied. The blonde wiped the blood from his nose and met the man's eyes. So, what's your plan, then? You know what Hinata wants to do, so the ball's in your court, he asked wearily. Hiyashi considered the question for a moment. I'm willing to go through with what she has in mind, but with a few modifications. I never thought I'd approve of her spending nights with a boy, but if my estimate of you is correct, perversion isn't an issue of yours. The conditions I'll be adding are that you eat your meals in the Hyuga estate, and that you spend as much time as possible out and about rather than cooped up indoors, he explained. Naruto frowned at one specific detail. Why do you want me to eat here? That feels kind of pointless, he asked skeptically. The clan head gestured to the boy's abdomen. You're horribly malnourished. Even if you were a proper amount each day, which you aren't, you hardly have the money to afford a balanced diet. That changes starting tomorrow, he said. Naruto opened his mouth to argue, but quickly closed it. Why are you trying so hard to help me? What have I ever done for you? He asked quietly. Hiyashi shrugged his shoulders and shifted in place. I see no reason not to. How could I ever expect to be respected by my daughters if I turned away a suffering child? Besides, Hinata tends to be a good judge of character. She isn't particularly social, but she has a decent handle on who most of her CL mates are as people. Of them all, she considers you to be the finest. I take that very seriously. He said simply. Naruto kept his silence initially, but eventually conceded. I'll try not to be too much trouble for you, he muttered. He was then ushered to his feet by Hiashi and led out to the kitchen, where a clearly stressed Hinata awaited them. Predictably, the first thing the heiress did was tightly embrace her CL mate. Whether or not she knew of what had transpired in her absence, Hiashi was unsure. What he was sure of, above all else, was the rightness of his decision upon seeing his daughter's eyes light up at Naruto's safety. Naruto lay awake in silence as he stared up at the ceiling of a room that was not his. Though he had originally planned on returning home that night to sleep, Hiashi had put a stop to the idea upon learning just how bloody his mattress was from Hinata. He had been placed in a guest room, much to the heiress' chagrin. As a whole, the day had been utterly exhausting. He hadn't slept in over 36 hours, and he was still in quite a bit of pain. After his conversation with Hiashi had concluded, he had taken perhaps the longest shower of his life, clocking in at nearly a full hour. Once he was serviceably clean, he had been given a long, detailed tour of the many halls and subdivisions of the estate by Hinata as a way to pee time. That part of the day had been fairly pleasant, as the girl's attentiveness and eagerness to make him feel comfortable had been greatly calming. This place is insanely huge. All of it is polished, too. Not sure how whoever cleans it all manages to keep up, he thought to himself. His mind then slowly drifted back to the worst part of his day, which had been the momentary possession by the fox. Though he understood the reasoning behind Hiashi's actions, he still found himself holding a small amount of disdain toward the man for initiating such a sequence of events. To not be in control of his own body was a violating feeling. One that he never wished to revisit. At least Hinata didn't see it. For all that she talks about not caring about the fox, I doubt she'd feel that way if she met him, he thought gratefully. As though in direct response to the thought, the sound of soft footsteps then caught the blonde's ear. Before he could begin to consider theories as to who they may belong to, he was given an answer. Slowly and carefully, the door to his guest room was pushed open and then closed again. In the darkness, Naruto could only make out the outline of the person who had just entered his room, but logic dictated that there was only a single person who would have any reason for visiting him at nearly midnight. That you, Hinata? He asked the figure. A slight squeaking sound confirmed his suspicions as the girl began to fidget. Did I wake you? I'm sorry if I did. Hinata whispered as she approached his bedside. Naruto sat up in bed and shook his head. No, I haven't gotten a wink. Kinda hard to sleep right now, he replied. The Hyuga girl, who he could now somewhat see as his eyes adjusted, gave a nod and let her hands relax themselves at her sides. As with me, for all that I love about you, the amount that you make me lose sleep isn't exactly pleasant, she said. Naruto then lowered his eyes to the covers again. Sorry about that, he apologized. Hinata, who was now standing over him at the left side of the mattress, sighed heavily. I'm not very good at sarcasm, am I? She asked. Quickly realizing that she had not been complaining seriously, relief washed over Naruto. You're not great, but you'll get there. You can be funny sometimes, actually, he said optimistically. The heiress smiled at this and then walked around to the other side of the bed. Skeptical as to what she was doing, Naruto followed her with his eyes. Said eyes promptly widened to saucers when he saw her sliding herself under the covers with him. Well, I'm glad I can return some of the humor you give to me, she said softly as she settled a few feet from him on the mattress. Still taken aback by her presence in the bed with him, Naruto took a moment to respond. What are you doing? He asked densely. The heiress' cheeks gained a pink tint at the question, but she did not shy away. I'm sharing a bed with you. Father can try as hard as he likes, but I'm not leaving you alone at night anymore. Especially not tonight. Don't worry, I won't try anything, she said shyly. Naruto tried and failed to reply several times before finally forcing words out of his throat. Are you sure you really want to be doing that? He asked weakly. Immediately and accurately detected the hidden meaning behind his words, Hinata scooted herself just close enough to him to latch onto one of his hands and pull him toward her. Within moments, they were shoulder to shoulder. Yes, I'm sure. Completely sure. To be honest, I've dreamt of this, she said in a small voice. The Jinchuriki meekly averted his eyes from her. Why's that? He asked. Hinata then reached out and put a hand on his cheek so as to turn his head to look her way. When he finally complied, she gave him a smile and laid her free hand over her heart. Because, it's what a husband and wife do, she admitted warmly. Suddenly confounded by an odd feeling in the pit of his stomach, one that was being greatly amplified by Hinata's gentle gaze, Naruto blinked sever. All times. Yeah, I guess it is, isn't it? He said ponderously. Hinata then let her hand slowly slide off of his cheek and drift back down to her side. If I'm making you uncomfortable, I'll stay as far to my side of the bed as possible, she said. Naruto quickly reviewed his feelings, and found that discomfort was not among them in spite of his naivety. No, you're fine. I'm just worried that you'll get in trouble with your dad, he replied. Hinata relaxed a tad and laced her fingers through his under the blankets. He can complain all he likes. You're my top priority. I may quite like laying here with you, but I'm still here to make sure you're okay. Call me melodramatic, but I'm protecting you from yourself, she said dismissively. Naruto returned his gaze to the ceiling. You get why I don't like myself very much, right? He asked carefully. Hinata gave his hand a squeeze and fully latched onto his arm. You consider yourself to be disgusting for harboring a demon. The more I've thought about it, the more I understand why you have such a hard time appreciating yourself, but I still need you to understand just how wrong you are, she said before turning his head back toward her for a second time. I'm not fond of using my status for comparisons, but consider for a moment that you're sharing a bed with the heiress of the largest clan in this entire country, even outside of Konoha. I came to you. If that doesn't say something about how precious you are, then I don't know what else does, she reasoned kindly. The Jinchuriki's expression remained conflicted. Your fixation on me is still kinda confusing. Nobody else has ever looked my way, he said honestly. Hinata traced the whisker markings on his face and sighed. You're a hard-working, kind-hearted, selfless person. Quite handsome too, I think. Why other girls can't see any of that is beyond me. It makes me sad that you're so underappreciated, but at the same time, it did open up a doorway for me to get to you. I feel very blessed to have been given a chance to be here for you, she said. At this, Naruto surprised them both by reaching out and hugging her into himself. Thank you for that. All of it. You being here for me, probably saved my life, even if I haven't exactly made it easy on you. I'm not all that sure of feelings and all that, I'm still really new to that stuff, but you're a really sweet girl. I know that for sure, he said kindly. Hinata gladly and happily returned the embrace. You're more than worth the trouble. Getting to be with you so much has been the joy of my life, she replied affectionately. The pair then lapsed into silence for a time, with Naruto eventually releasing her from his grip and returning them to their previous shoulder-to-shoulder position. I want to repay you somehow. I know that there really isn't anything I can give you, but still. The Jinchuriki said quietly. Hinata gave him a shy look. I know how you could pay me back. At least for now, she said vaguely. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the reply. Let's hear it then. He pressed. The heiress then nestled into him again and latched her arms around his abdomen. Hold me again. Let me sleep in your arms. Nothing more, nothing less, she requested. Though he was taken aback by the simplistic innocence of her conditions, Naruto obliged and wrapped her up in another hug. Like this? He asked awkwardly. Hinata smiled contentedly and curled up against him to begin submitting herself to unconsciousness. Yes, that's perfect. Naruto's eyes dragged open as he awoke from one of his more peaceful slumbers in quite some time. As his vision cleared and his senses returned to him, he began to perceive the world around him once again. Once he was fully aware again, he realized that he was holding something warm in his arms. Upon further inspection, he felt his face heat up. Hinata was settled against him with her head tucked under his chin and her arms loosely clinging to him. She was still asleep, as evidenced by her even breath and general stillness. It took very little time for the memories of the previous night to come trickling back into Naruto's mind. The heiress had specifically requested to sleep in his embrace, and it appeared that they had remained connected through the night. As he processed, the Jinchuriki found that he very much enjoyed the feeling of Hinata's small form being snuggled into his. Carefully and slowly, he made a bit of space between them to better view the girl. The action, for better or worse, caused her to stir. Her eyes gradually fluttered open as she joined him in consciousness. Once they were fully open, Hinata let out a small yawn and smiled softly at the sight of the boy laying so close to her. Good morning. She greeted him sleepily. The blonde rubbed a bit of sleep out of his left eye before responding. Did you sleep all right? He asked. Hinata nodded and reached out for him. She then brushed back his disheveled bangs and sighed. The sleep was wonderful, but I like this better. She replied warmly. Her hand then moved down from his forehead to his cheek, where she let it rest. The blonde glanced at the soft hand settled on his face and then back to Hinata. You guys have really nice beds. Even your guest rooms are better than mine. He commented jokingly. The heiress sighed and maintained her gentle contact with his cheek. I don't mean this offensively, but compared to us, you live in abject poverty. That fact makes me incredibly sad, but it's the truth. It's part of why I'm glad Father is so willing to let you eat our food. We can afford nutrients that you can't, she said. A shy smile then spread across her lips. I also have a good excuse to cook for you for real now. She added lightly. Naruto chuckled a tad at a detail he had just come across. Did you plan this all out? I mean, you had a whole tour ready when I first got here, and you said that you'd always wanted us to share a bed. Now you're saying the same thing for cooking? He asked curiously. Hinata gazed at him and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear as she lay on her side. I'd be lying if I said that I haven't thought about what I'd do if I ever brought you home. I've been waiting a long time to have you here. As much as I wish it didn't come about because of you hurting inside, I'm glad that you're under these blankets with me, she explained. Naruto's expression shifted a touch. Your dad said something like that. He told me that you've been watching me for a long time, he said carefully. The heiress let her hand slowly slide from his cheek and down onto the small space of empty mattress between them. He isn't wrong. You've been my favorite thing to think about for years. Even before I fully understood how I felt. You've always had the oddest ability to make me smile and giggle. Those smiles turned to longing after a while. Since then, I've been looking for a way to get to you. I've always seen through your smiles, but I never could have imagined just how much you needed a friend, she replied with a slight shade of regret in her voice. Naruto kept his silence for a moment. I'm not all that great at picking up on things, but so far, you've kissed me once, risked your grades for me, and asked to snuggle with me in the same bed. I think you want more than friendship out of me, he said thoughtfully. Hinata responded by closing the gap between them again and recreating the embrace in which they had slept. I also told you that, mind you. But I also said that I don't expect you to want the same things I do. The fact that you've let me fulfill a few of the dreams I've been clinging to is enough for me. You can walk away from me anytime you want. Just know that I'll always be here, ready to take you in and comfort you. She said quietly. Naruto shook his head and squeezed the girl tenderly. I just need to learn to love myself a little first. Once that's done, you're up next. I'd never abandon the closest thing to family I've ever had, he said. Hinata sighed and nuzzled her face into his upper chest. I'd rather be your wife than your mother or sister, she countered drearily as Naruto's body heat soothed her once more. The blonde reddened at the comment. I didn't mean the family thing literally, ya know. He shot back, clearly embered by her supposed interpretation of his words. The heiress giggled at his discomfort and hooked one of her legs through his to link them together. Just teasing. Not that I'm kidding, because I'm not, she said humorously. Naruto raised an eyebrow as the Hyuga girl obviously and happily reveled in their closeness. What's gotten into you? You're actually flirting with me? He asked skeptically. Hinata smiled and turned her head so that her ear was resting on his sternum. The shift allowed her to make side-on eye contact with him. I just figure that since we're tangled up on a mattress together, I have plenty of ground to stand on. Don't get used to it, though. I'll still be the awkward mess you know most of the time, she said with a slight shrug. You aren't a mess. A mess would have freaked out and ran away from what you saw just before you brought me here. A mess wouldn't have known what to say to me all those times I was tearing myself down. Don't call yourself that, the Jinchuriki said firmly. For once, their roles had reversed. I more meant socially than in general, but thank you for that. Really? Hinata replied quietly. A lapse of silence then occurred. The sun had yet to rise, leaving them in darkness with only one another for a sign of life. Could we stay this way for a while? Naruto asked eventually. Hinata's spirit soared at the request. She then took a bold step forward. She answered his question by leaning her head up and kissing his cheek affectionately. Of course we can. You don't even have to ask, she said sweetly. Naruto touched the place her lips had made contact and closed his eyes. Your dad's definitely gonna kill me for this. He chuckled as he let himself begin to doze off again. Hinata smiled and tugged the top cover up so that only their faces were poking from the blankets. Over my dead body. Hinata smiled to herself as she patiently awaited the completion of the oven's heating process. To pee the roughly 15-minute wait, she was chopping vegetables that would later be added to the meal she had in mind. It was 1:30 in the afternoon, and neither she nor Naruto had eaten. By the grace of something resembling a god, they had managed to awaken themselves and exit the bedroom they had shared well before her father could catch wind of what had occurred. Nothing improper had taken place during the night, or in the morning, but the fact that they had shared a bed at all was likely to draw suspicions. Despite this, the memory of having spent nearly 8 full hours curled up in the Jinchuriki's embrace brought Hinata great joy. In the midst of the pleasant memories, another person entered the kitchen. Somebody looks quite starstruck, came the voice of the heiress, junior sister, Hanabi. Hinata shrugged her shoulders and finished chopping the greens on the cutting board. Can you blame me? I have my favorite person sitting in the kitchen. This is a good day, she replied jovially. Her sister gave an exaggerated pout. You'd say that to your own sister. How cruel, she whined. Hinata chuckled a bit and set her chopping knife aside for future use. Different feelings, different people. Don't worry, I still love you. For now anyway. She joked, reaching out and ruffling her sister's hair as she spoke. Hanabi then joined her leaning on the counter and gave her a sly look. So, how was he? She asked with a smirk. Hinata frowned initially, but quickly realized what she was insinuating. When she did, she rapidly shook her head. No, no, no. Nothing like that happened, she insisted with a beet red face. Predictably, Hanabi laughed out loud at her reaction and leaned into her elder sister. Are you sure? I spied on you two this morning, and looked to me like you slept together. Most of the time, that means things got fun, she teased. Hinata shook her head again and began to fidget. We didn't do anything improper. We just snuggled a little. He was very careful not to touch me inappropriately. As was I with him, she replied meekly. Her sister maintained her grin and nudged her shoulder with her elbow. You say that like you'd have complained if things had heated up, she joked. Hinata sighed heavily and fought to suppress the heat in her cheeks. How you even know about that kind of thing at your age is beyond me. But no, I would have complained. Not for any lack of attraction, but because what he needs right now isn't carnal. He needs to be shown care and patience, which is exactly what I'm striving for. She corrected a bit more calmly. Hanabi shrugged and began to fiddle with a stray fork. What's wrong with him anyway? I honestly never thought I'd see the day when you'd finally just drag him home with you. She asked casually. The heiress immediately stabbed the knife, which she had taken hold of once again to begin chopping another set of vegetables, into the wooden cutting board. Nothing is wrong with him. What's wrong is the way people have turned him into a doormat for something that isn't his fault. He doesn't understand that yet, but he will, she hissed. Hanabi did a double take. Of all the reactions she had expected, indignant anger had been fairly far from the most likely within her mind. Hinata Hyuga was many things, but belligerent was not one of them. I'd be lying if I said I understood exactly what you mean by that, but I'll take your word for it. He's at least had the sense to show father due respect for taking him in last night, she said carefully. The elder of the Hyuga sisters calmed once more and pulled the blade from the cutting board. Forgive me. That was a bit extreme. I just feel very strongly about this. She apologized quietly. The oven then made a high noise that signified that it had concluded its heating process. And yes, he's been very gracious. He resisted coming here initially, but I didn't give him a choice. He needed to be tended to. She added as she inserted the food she had pre-ready to be heated onto the middle rack of the oven. Hanabi raised an eyebrow. Tended to. Is he injured? She asked skeptically. Hinata nodded stiffly and removed her apron for the time being. Yes, sadly. Not badly, which I'm thankful for, but enough for infection to have been a concern. He's been fixed up for the most part, but still. It worries me either way. She explained with pursed lips. Hanabi's expression softened. I don't remember much about Mother, but what little I do is reminding me a lot of you right now. The same concern and will to heal, she said. The heiress smiled at this. Thank you for that. I do try, even if I'm too meek to go as far as I need to much of the time. For him, though, I've found strength to force the issue. I hope I can extend it to others as well. You included, she said gratefully. For the next several minutes, the siblings continued to converse about trivial matters, but after a time, the topic of Naruto arose once again. What does father think of him? Hanabi asked after a brief pause between conversations. Hinata considered the question for a moment. It's been hard to tell for sure. He clearly doesn't dislike him, and has spoken fairly favorably of him, but there's always more to father's opinions than meets the eye. Only time will tell, I think, she said thoughtfully. Hanabi rolled her eyes. It just isn't fair. Whenever I bring friends home, he always glares at them and scares them off. When you do it, he's all for it. I'm jealous. She complained only semi-sarcastically. Hinata gave her a bored look. If you're talking about the incident with the Hokage's grandson, then you only have yourself to blame. You could have at least tried to pick a better time to drag him through the front gates than during the new year's ceremony. She pointed out. The younger girl grumbled something under her breath. Yes, but that wasn't his fault. Now he's terrified to do things with me, she said, a hint of irritation in her voice. Hinata chuckled a bit. We have opposite problems, it seems. You're too aggressive, and I'm too reluctant, she said humorously. Hanabi pouted dramatically. Life is so cruel to us, she whined. Hinata glanced out into the dining room where Naruto patiently awaited the return of the heiress. If social extremes are the extent of our struggles, then what wonderful lives we've led. Naruto glanced up from the wooden surface of the dining table as the sound of footsteps alerted him to the presence of another person in the room for the first time in a fair amount of time. As he had somewhat expected, it was Hinata who had entered the room, and she was carrying a set of plates. Upon reaching the table, she briskly set them out on either side. She then sat herself down across from him and visibly relaxed. I'm sorry it took so long. I just wanted to make sure it turned out the way I wanted it to, she explained as she straightened her posture and readied herself for the meal. At this, Naruto inspected the dish presented to him for the first time since its very recent arrival. It was a plate of breaded chicken, rice, and a kind of exotic noodle. Definitely smells good, he said before taking a bite of the chicken with the fork provided to him. Though slightly unnerved by the expectant stare Hinata was sending his way as he chewed, the Jinchuriki found the meat to be beyond satisfactory. Worth the wait. God damn, he muttered as he took another bite of the food. After a few more moments of chewing, he glanced back at Hinata. The heiress wore a look of prideful joy as she watched him eat. She had yet to touch her own food. You're really good at making food, the blonde said awkwardly as he took another portion. Hinata blinked several times. And you've just made my entire month, she replied as she fought to contain the goofy smile threatening to overtake her features. Naruto shrugged and sampled the noodles. Yeah, you did mention that you'd been waiting for an excuse to have me eat something you made, so I guess that makes sense. Seriously, though, you should start a restaurant. I'd pay for this stuff if I had money, he said. Hinata averted her eyes from his. You're going to make me pee out, she murmured quietly. After regathering herself, she began to eat her own food. And you'll never have to pay for what I make for you. Seeing you enjoy it is more than enough for me, she added a moment later. Naruto, who was nearly 3/4 of the way finished with his meal, smiled. You made me like rice, which I normally hate. You're probably gonna see plenty of me enjoying your food, he said with a grin. Despite her obvious and visible joy, Hinata opted to switch topics. I don't mean to darken the mood, but, how are you feeling? Be honest with me, she asked. The Jinchuriki set his fork down and stayed quiet for a few moments. It's been weird. In small moments, I'm honestly feeling better than I have in years. Last night, this morning, right now, even. Those little pieces of time are some of the best I've ever had. In between them, though, he still won't shut the hell up, he explained slowly. Easily deducing who he was, Hinata's expression darkened. What I'm about to say isn't meant for you, she said vaguely before standing up from her seat and making her way around the table. Once she reached him, she took hold of the collar of his shirt and stood him up with a surprising amount of force. She then leaned over into his ear while still maintaining a firm grip on his collar. If you can hear me, and I know you can, freak, then give me a few moments of your time, she began, her tone deadly calm. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as Hinata's hand further tightened on his shirt. Don't get comfortable hiding inside of him like the coward you are. I'll find a way to drag you out and hurt you. I'll make you whimper and beg for your wretched life, you worthless parasite. Just give me some time. I'll find a way. I swear it on my mother's grave, she continued coldly. Naruto shuddered at the sound of her voice. It was a tone he'd never heard before, and one he hardly wished to hear again. For a time, Hinata remained in close proximity to his ear, with her breathing being the only sound Naruto could hear. Eventually, the heiress pulled back and released his collar and let her hands settle on his shoulders gently. She then gave him a soft smile. Like I said, that wasn't for you. Not at all. I'm sorry if I scared you a little, she said, drawing a slight nod from Naruto. Sensing that he was still somewhat uncomfortable, Hinata leaned forward and gave him a soft, steady peck on the lips. When she gave him space again, the Jinchuriki's face was red. I know I should have asked first, but take that as proof that none of that ire was directed at you, Hinata said before letting her hands drop to her waist. She then walked back around to her side of the table and collected their plates, both of which were cleaned. A moment later, she disappeared into the kitchen to deposit them. When she returned, Naruto spoke for the first time in several minutes. Can we go for a walk? He asked blankly. Hinata nodded and quickly rejoined him. She then slipped her hand into his. Where would you like to go? She asked curiously. With a brief glance down at their interlaced fingers, Naruto mentally concluded that he didn't mind the contact. Let's just wander around. That's what I usually do on my days off, he said. The heiress smiled at the idea and began to pull him toward the door. Fine by me. Let's get moving, then, she said. The pair then exited the dining hall and rapidly made their way out of the estate entirely. Though the day was largely aimless, it was one of the most serene Naruto had ever known.